So yeah, we're ready to go. So hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jump planning session for the Tackle project. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ramon Roman Nissen. I am the product manager for Migration Toolkit for application, the downstream distribution for the Tackle project. And first thing first, about the logistics, we set up a Miro board for you. Let me share the link with you in the chat. There you are. So for those who are registered, we had a session yesterday just showing how this thing works. We put all the slides for today there for you to add some sticky notes and comments, and add questions, thoughts, and any feedback in general about the session that we're having today. And we also added a feedback board in there for feedback from the field exercise that we will be doing at the end of this session. So that's it for the logistics. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Tackle project, well, it is a toolkit that is focused on application migration and refactoring to leverage Kubernetes, to use everything that the platform has to offer on that space. This has been, at least for the moment, a joint effort between Red Hat and IBM. And yeah, on the Red Hat side, on the IBM side, allow me to introduce you to Maja Bukovic and Jean Ikes. Hi, guys.
Hi, Ramon. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the intros.
Jean, are you there?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I think Jean has something to share with us about the different initiatives that we have under the Tackle umbrella. So go ahead, Jean.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Yeah, today we're excited to talk to you about the set of Tackle work thread we have going. So first, we'll look at a set of capabilities called Containerization Assessment, which deals with looking at application portfolios, applying AI to understand what can be containerized, what cannot. Then we'll talk about automated configuration discovery, which is a set of capabilities we're joint developing to look at how do we identify configuration properties out of applications. And then we'll talk about data-intensive validity advisory, Ide, which is a set of work that would allow our developers and architects be able to understand the data relationships in their application. And finally, we'll talk about test-driven modernization, which is a set of work that focuses on providing differential test capabilities with code change, in particular with modernization. All right, back here.
Okay, so first of all, we have Phil Katanak, which is the engineering manager for MTA on Red Hat, that will be sharing some details about the advance that we have on the Tackle MVP, the basic foundation pieces, the inventory, Pathfinder and controls, and also the wind-up project that is being integrated. So Phil, over to you.
Sure, can I share my screen, Ramon, or do you want to retain control?
I can move the slides from here,
right,
so just
yeah,
tell me what you need.
Yeah, okay then. So the application inventory, this is one of the three sort of pillars of the new application portfolio that we are developing to allow modernization and migration of applications. The idea of the application inventory is that it's it allows you to manage your portfolio of applications, and it potentially has use beyond the duration of a migration project, but could have utility in the medium term as well. We see it as being a sort of natural integration point for all of the Tackle projects. So from the application inventory, you can declare your applications, you can add metadata to describe them, and then you can launch into the assessment process and the review process, which is part of the Pathfinder workflow. And this is where you answer a series of questions that inform the decision as to what you're going to do with your application in terms of rehost, refactor, replatform, that kind of thing. But we'll also be the vehicle via which you can do an analysis via the wind-up project. So at the moment, wind-up as a standalone project that you can consume as a CLI or a web UI. But ultimately, what we want to do is allow users to invoke it from the application inventory. So they will add some metadata to describe the GitHub repositories or the location of the application archive files, and then invoke the analysis process from the application inventory and generate the reports that you're familiar with at the moment in terms of the the reports that give you the details about which migration issues need to be addressed, how many of them there are, which lines of code need to be changed, which technology tags have been identified within the applications as well. All that kind of thing will be invoked from the application inventory. We see applications. Oh, okay.
Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah. Did somebody have a question? Okay.
Let's move on.
Yeah. By all means, go back a second, please, Ramon. We'll just finish off the points on that slide. So there's some predefined metadata that we encourage users to link applications to, such as the business services that they support. And this is just one of the control entities that I'll touch on in a little bit. It's important that you can define the inter-application interdependencies, so northbound and southbound dependencies and what their relationships are. And also to be able to add as many sort of dimensions of metadata as you want to the applications, and that's what the tagging model allows us to do. So it can describe applications in terms of which programming languages they've been developed in, which operating systems they rely upon, which database data stores they use, all these kinds of things. And although we will provide some shipped tags, a shipped collection of data that hopefully will be aligned to Application Container Advisor, we encourage users to also define their own tags and create as many dimensions as they want. Okay, thanks Roman. Please move on. Okay then, so Pathfinder. So Pathfinder was originally developed by Red Hat Consulting, Noel O'Connor and others, and it's, you can see by the usage of it that it's a very popular tool and is very, has provided loads of utility in terms of the modernization and migration of applications. What we set out to do in this first phase of the project was to provide a functional superset of what we have within Pathfinder. So, all of the same reports and questions that you have within Pathfinder at the moment, but also add additional things like making it internationalizable, so you can choose whichever language you want for your Pathfinder questionnaire, and also linking into the application inventory, so it's all integrated into that. Yeah. And the reports provide a lot of useful information about the suitability of applications for containerization. They highlight risks. All the risks are basically metadata that's associated to the answers to particular questions, and these questions can be changed to the user's own needs. And the reports, there's sort of three main reports other than the list of risks, which is like there's a speed dial set of reports which give you like a landscape overview of your applications and whether they are sort of high, medium, or low risk in terms of containerization. And then we've got an adoption plan, which allows you to see the interdependencies between the applications and the relative sizes. And then there's a two-dimensional grid that gives you a view of business criticality and level of confidence as to those applications. And you can also see the dependency relationships between them. So all of these reports are really cool, interesting reports, and that's the current piece of work that's under development at the moment in these last couple of sprints before the end of the first half of this year. Yeah, the controls, thanks Ramon. The controls are the final sort of piece in the jigsaw, if you like. These are the data that sort of adds value to both the application inventory and the Pathfinder assessment process. So these are things like business services, the tagging model, stakeholders, so the list of people who are involved in performing the review, people who have a vested interest in these applications, and real subject matter expertise about how they are technically made up and maintained and delivered to the business. And we have a set of stakeholder groups that allow you to group these people together, so people have a shared common interest in particular verticals within the company would be grouped together as a stakeholder group. And then we also have a set of job functions, and these are just a predefined set of roles that allows you to describe the sort of stakeholder's perspective for a particular application. So it could be technical architect, it could be a DBA, somebody from the project office, someone from QE, internal audit, etc. Okay, thanks Ramon. Okay, and so the other side to the work that we do is wind up. So obviously everybody knows the migration toolkit for applications. It's a well-established project that's been around for some time now. It's very Java EE centric, and it decompiles applications and then uses an extensible set of rules to identify migration issues. So we have this concept of a set of targets, and the rules are linked to targets. So one target could be cloud readiness, for example, to look for cloud native patterns. It could be EAP 7.4, which is migration rules to move to the latest version of EAP. We've got rules for Spring Boot to Quarkus and many other migration paths as well. It's consumable as a CLI and a web UI. There's an operator to deploy it on OpenShift as well as an OpenShift template. And we have a number of Ide plugins. So we've got the traditional Code Ready Studio Eclipse plugin, which was the first one. We've got a VS Code extension, we've got an Eclipse Share extension. And coming in the next release, which is 5.2 in July, we'll have an IntelliJ extension as well. And that's pretty much where we are at the moment. So in terms of our key milestones and deliveries, by the end of the first half of this year, we'll have app inventory, Pathfinder, and the controls ready, available as an MVP. Early in July, we will have wind up 5.2, which will have the rules to support migrating to JBoss 7.4, and also we'll have an IntelliJ plugin in that release as well. And then our focus for the remainder of 2021 is to integrate wind up into the Tackle project, so that you can invoke an assessment from Pathfinder and you can invoke an analysis from the application inventory as well. A stepping stone to us getting there will be, we will need to allow wind up to perform an analysis from a GitHub repository. So we're looking to add functionality into wind up to be able to target GitHub repository as the source of the application data, rather than linking it to an application archive file or pointing it to a local directory. And that will be a real stepping stone to having wind up integrated into the application inventory. But it'll also be a nice standalone feature that will be good to release on its own.
Thank you, Phil.
I think that's pretty much from my side.
Thank you. So coming up next for the containerization assessment tool, we have Anup Kalia. Anup, the stage is yours.
Hello. So what we are trying to do is that I think there will be a roadmap, but I think this is the overall plan, like how ACA will interact with the other existing tool like application inventory and Pathfinder, and then the wind up. So I drew up a rough chart here based on Phil's suggestion that how the information from application inventory will come to ACA, and then ACA would actually process those information and then send it back to the application inventory. Sometimes the application information can also come from Pathfinder, so that the things that needed the translation and the recommendation would be provided accordingly. So here we regarding the application inventory, we especially talk about application tags, which are very customer specific tags. So in general, we want to standardize those tags so as to do better reasoning, and also how we enable the mapping them into respective containers. That will be the key contribution from the ACA. And the overall goal is to provide the assessment or help application inventory and Pathfinder to able to recommend what part of the application could be modernized and what part of the application could not be modernized. So to make all those recommendations respectively. And I think we have a plan like how we are moving to tackle. So this is the roadmap. Thanks. So what we are, as of now, what we have done so far, by the end of the Q2, we have refactored the KG, because what we observed that there is some aspect of the proprietary aspect that we need to remove. And we kept mostly the entities, name entities, and the relationships that are non-proprietary and could be shared to the open community. And then followed by in the Q3 early part, we are doing a lot of respective code refactoring for the open sourcing the ACA. And then by July, we aim to integrate with the conveyor. So we are trying to go through all the prerequisites to actually to able to do so with respect to how do we actually open source a tool. And then followed by that, once we release that, what we are trying to do is that I think this part of the release will include only the entity standardization part, which basically translate the tags to respective name entities are mapped to the existing KG in the ACA. But followed by that, we will actually do the refactoring for the planning, which is basically mapping the application to respective containers. So that will be followed by this activity. And then I think the plan, since this is being an open source community and this is being an AI tool, what we plan is to create a benchmark for the entity standardization so that open community in terms of industry and academia can collaborate and contribute to developing more interesting benchmarks and also evaluating the existing data sets and the model that is present in the tool. And of course there's a plan to expand the ACKG, because once we keep only the community and leave out the proprietary stuff, the ACKG kind of reduce. But what we are working right now is that we are trying to do more fundamental research of how do we extend the ACKG with the help of universal KG such as Wikidata and DBpedia. Followed by that, I think the broader plan then quickly connect with the first step is to connect with the application inventory, understand how the client adoption would happen, and definitely here a lot of interesting stuff that we want to bring along, especially with respect to understanding how customer provide their tags, what kind of translation it needs, and how we can actually enhance our the underlying model to handle such tags. Followed by at the end of the Q4, we are planning is that we are kind of doing some AI-based configuration discovery, which is a kind of in collaboration with ACD and wind-up teams. So in general, what would happen is that ACA might provide an advisory sort of approach to discover the configuration, but then the human in the loop will come into factor to kind of validate those, and then ACD and windup will take over in terms of code generation and containerization.
Okay. So next, for the automated configuration discovery tool, we have John Rofrano, who surprisingly is not on the Millennium Falcon today. Hi, John.
Yeah, Chewy couldn't get it started.
Sorry, I don't have the right order here. There you are.
Good. You're good. Yeah, Chewy's working on the Falcon. Apologies. This is the dirty little part that no one wants to deal with, right? Configuration. When we were building the refactoring tool we built here at IBM, as we're doing the manual refactoring of a monolith, we're taking the properties files and stuff and going, okay, which property goes with which one? And we put them all in everyone. Copy all the properties files into all the microservices. It's got to work. And it does work, but that's not the right way to do it. So the idea here, everybody's trying to solve this. Move to Kube has a way to solve this. Windup's doing a bit of it. And so we thought, why not have a common service that can go forage around for all these properties files, all this configuration data, put it perhaps in some canonical form, in some knowledge graph, and then generate the target from it. And so I'm a big believer in reuse. I'm lazy. If you've got a wheel, I'm going to use the wheel. And so we started with windup in reusing the rules from windup. And there's no one way that's going to get all the configuration information. So as Anoop just described, we're working on using AI to reason about this information, right? Because a developer or an architect can look at this file and go, that looks like a database URI, even though it doesn't say it is, type of thing when you can't find stuff. And so we're working on that as one approach. Another approach is just grepping through the files, finding the config files and parsing them and understanding them. And a third approach is using rules. So we don't think there's any one way to do it. We'd like to have several drivers, several ways that you can go collect information. And so we're starting with windup. You'll notice, so Phil, we already created a service that you can call and give windup get URI, get URL, and it will clone the Git stuff, run windup on it, and give the config data back. So we should talk about about that. If you guys have it, I'd be happy to use it, but we built one. But that's the idea. So that Graphdb server and the windup server, that is a backend service. There's two parts. There's a command line interface and a backend service. The command line's written in Python, the backend's written in Java, and why not? And so one of the drivers you could use is the windup driver, which is the first one that we worked on, and the first transform we worked on was Spring Boot to Quarkus. And so what you can do is you can point this server at a Git repository, and then it will collect all the data and put it in the graph. Windup uses Janus graph and then discards it. It's an in-memory Janus graph. And we thought, no, in doing migrations, you need to continue to enhance this, right? You're going to discover and discover more and discover more and be able to enrich this data. So we made it persistent in a persistent Graphdb server so that you continue to enrich the data before you do your transforms. But the idea here is to get the community around it. And so the design we wanted to have is have a bunch of crawlers that can go off and forage for data and support different frameworks. You see there's mappings, source mappings here. So you tell it, the framework is JBoss, or the framework is Tomcat, or it's Spring Boot or whatever. That would give it some metadata about what to go look for, possible things to look for. And so we wanted the community to be able to build these crawlers. So that's one thing of the design, is to have it modular. And if we don't have a crawler for something, the community can build it. If possible, we'd like it not to have to write Python code. We'd like them to just make a YAML file, right? A config file. We all love YAML. A config file, add a new config file with the mappings. And then, the code that we've built will go off and do the mappings for you. And the same thing with the translators, right? The translators have a set of mappings where it's written in Python. So we're using Jinja 2 as a template driver, the template engine. But you would just create a new template, you create a new mapping, and then hopefully, the framework can do what you want. If you can't, you could always, modify the Python code and add more capabilities. But the idea here is to have something that, one, can solve this problem for everyone as a common solution. So we've written some windup rule extensions, right, that are running on our windup server, and those are using extra windup rules that we wrote to go off and forage for information and get it back. And then, the community could create new mappings or create new translators or new collectors or whatever. But the idea is to have a persistent place to keep this data over long migrations, the ability to not need it, right? So it also work locally, so that if you just want to collect the data, it'll put it in like a JSON file on your file system, and it'll continue to enhance the JSON file. But have a way to have people to add to this, right, to the community, to rally around it and add new transforms and add new mappings and stuff. And I didn't kind of get what those 3 boxes at the bottom were, so I left them there, but I didn't move them. But I guess I should have said, and windup will use this, and Pathfinder will use this. I apologize. I didn't get the memo. So we've been working on this since March. So the important thing is, in May we did the Spring Boot to Quarkus transforms with the windup rules. We're using windup code, and then June is what we're set for do the initial MVP. So right now I'm in the middle of we're cleaning up the code that we have. I'm adding some test cases. So for those of you who don't know me, I teach a course on DevOps and Agile methodologies at NYU, and I teach students test-driven development. Write the test for the code you wish you had. Don't write the code first. I wrote the code first. But I've never written test cases for a CLI before, right? So now I'm deep into how do you make test cases for Click. I use Click for the CLI. So, but we're adding test cases. I don't want to get all Gandhi on you. Be like, be the change you want to be in the world, right? Set the example. So I don't want it to go up there without test cases. But we're getting that ready. I guess we're going through the approvals here at IBM. I guess I have to ask Marco to make a repo this month. And so we're shooting for the end of June to get that out. And then, additional frameworks, right? So then, okay, we got Spring Boot to Quark is great. And then there's a whole bunch of things on the left. There's a whole bunch of things on the right. Start to add more transforms. I'm sure we'll figure out we've, forgot something that doesn't work in the Python code. We'll update the code. But the idea is to, by the end of the year, have at least, 4 Java frameworks that we could do multiple transforms on to other frameworks, right, that you want to migrate to. Okay, I think I'm out.
Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you. So next we have Yasuka Tsuno for the Data Intensive Validity Advisor, also known, fortunately, as DIVA. Go ahead, Yasu.
Yes. Here is an Tackle Diva tool. So this tool objective is data-centric application analysis. That is, we focus on database and transaction analysis from 3 viewpoints: inventory, dependency detection, and refactoring. This Diva tool achieves for database transaction with inventory, dependency, and refactoring. And thanks to the kind Red Hat support, and it was released on Conveyor GitHub. You can see under 6 analysis box in Tackle Diva. 7. This 7 is just primary release. We want to expand to enhance to strength Tackle Diva tool or others. So our next step is to integrate with other tools. So we started wind-up integrations in order to enrich its analysis report with data analysis result. Go to the next page. So here is the Diva roadmap. So thanks to great support, and we achieved second quarter milestones to publish to Conveyor community. And so we are going to Q3 work integration with other tools. Again, wind-up is important first step for Diva. Of course, we are looking for the other tool. So yes, so your comments are quite welcome to how to integrate Diva and what kind of data analysis is required for other tools. And yes, this month we plan and Conveyor meetup on next Tuesday, and plan to publish blog on opensource.com. Thank you.
Okay, so
if I could just interject, like data is the thing everyone forgets about and leaves as an exercise for the student. So I think it's critical that we have the ability to analyze data as we break these monoliths up in the microservices and refactor, to be able to look at what transactions are affected and stuff and how is the data affected, because nobody's doing this and we need to do it.
Absolutely, and it becomes the shoe on the stone if you forget about it later during the migration process.
Exactly.
So yeah, absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
Very, very, very cool stuff here. So last but not least, we have Saurabh Sinya for the test-driven modernization tool. Saurabh, stage is yours.
Thanks, Ramon. So this slide shows our high-level vision of the kind of testing-related tools we want to bring to Conveyor. And so the question we ask is, like in test-driven development, you have testing plays a key role, and you have a set of well-defined principles and process that you follow, right? So can you have a similar set of principles and a process that you can apply for test-driven modernization? And this slide shows one such process. So the starting point here is you compute your coverage goal. What is it that you want to cover with your test cases? These could be general purpose coverage goals, but what is more likely is that these will be driven by the kinds of changes you've made in the application as part of the modernization of the migration effort. Then the next step is to assess the coverage of existing test cases, if you have existing test cases available, to find gaps in coverage, because those uncovered goals are what you want to target for generation of new test cases. And in this set of tooling, we do want to provide automated, or in some cases semi-automated, support for generating test cases. Now that you have a set of test cases, the next step is to add assertions to the test cases. And you do this by running the test cases on the legacy version of the application, monitoring the object states that are created at runtime and encoding them into assertions in the test case. And this is a key step, because these are the assertions that will help you identify behavioral differences between the legacy and the modernized app. Without assertions, the only differences you'll detect are the ones that cause crashes or runtime exceptions. Now, depending on the type of migration modernization you've done on the app, you might have to adapt or migrate the test cases before they can be executed on the modernized app. So again, you might need some tool support for that. And then finally, you run your test cases on the modernized app, and for the differences that are observed, you analyze those to identify whether there are bugs in refactoring or modernization. So basically, our goal in this work is to build tools to support this kind of a process. And we have some initial tooling that implements some of these steps at the unit level for Java applications.
Okay, if you allow me to add the migrator perspective, this solves one classic problem that we have on the field, which is, does the application behave exactly the same after performing the migration? So this is a big, big, big deal for people on the field.
So the tool that I talked about, the unit test generator and differential testing tool for Java, was onboarded into Conveyor last week. Currently, it's a private repo. We're in the final steps of making the modifications that need to be done before it's made public at the end of this month. And then over the next few months in Q3, we expect to make significant and continue to make significant enhancement into test generator in terms of increasing its coverage, in terms of scalability by evaluating it on large applications, and also assessing the effectiveness of the tool. Then we're also going to explore integrations for this tool, so in particular for app inventory and windup. So we anticipate this work will also happen in Q3. And then we are starting some new work on generating test cases, end-to-end test cases for web application that basically drive the application through its user interface. So think about Selenium test cases. And so we expect that we'll have some feasible technical approach for this by the end of September, and then an initial tool release towards the end of the year. And another thread of work we'll look at in the last quarter is basically to, once we have these UX test cases, like Selenium kinds of test cases, can we carve out unit test cases from those? The benefit of doing this is that these kinds of test cases would exercise the methods with much more realistic values than what you get if you're trying to generate them directly at the unit level via random generation of input values. So that's another thread of work for which we expect the tooling would come probably early next year. Thanks.
Okay, so that's it for the presentation. So any questions from the audience to any of our tech leads?
Hey, it's James. Hey, I asked on the Conveyor Slack channel, but I'll ask again. So it's super exciting to see kind of all these code and projects and potential to integrate with like a common application inventory. Is there like a plan or an idea of like when there's a sprint review or a sprint demo where these things will like be demonstrated together, or is it just kind of like they get demonstrated individually? And I don't know, I'm just trying to understand kind of, and maybe it's too early to know that yet, right? We got to get the code out there and start actually integrating it, but I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, James. Great question. Yeah, it's a bit early to do integrated demo. You saw, as you probably saw, for most of these work thread, we have integration plans somewhere in end of third quarter, early fourth quarter. So you're looking at integrated demo at that point with combination windup app inventory. However, that being said, we are trying to engage with you guys and the community as soon as we can. So in fact, today you will see a demo from testing, and the Diva work, as you saw, will have a meetup gathering and a demo very quickly on June 8th. And the other two assets will have demo ready as soon as they hit the first feature delivery for Tackle.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
And the config discovery team's been working with the windup team, and one of the recommendations they said to us was, can you build a common component that we can embed in windup and you can call remotely? And so I thought that was a great idea. So I think the windup team wants to take some of what we're doing with config discovery and have it available in windup totally integrated. But I agree with you. We need the end-to-end developer journey. We need to take them through, here's how, a day in the life, right? And here's how you go through all this stuff. And we failed miserably if we can't do that. So, I'm on board.
Okay, cool. No, it's good to hear, from product management and product marketing, we always want it 2 quarters sooner than is going to be delivered right now. That's cool. If it's happening organically and we're moving in that right direction, that's awesome. So cool to hear.
Yeah, the idea, James, is to have some sort of Lego approach. I mean, the tools will probably be consumable as a standalone tools, but the idea is to have everything integrated. We have identified 2 natural integration points in the application inventory and windup. So some of the tools like Diva, ACD that do an actual analysis, we thought about integrating those analyses within the analysis flow that windup already establishes. So yeah, definitely.
Cool.
And I think Saurabh is going to demonstrate. You're already sharing your screen. We're going to go through the demonstration for the testing tool, the test-driven modernization. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I see, Ramal, that we're running a bit late. So we had 20 minutes scheduled for this. So should we
go ahead? Go ahead. Our bad.
Okay. All right. So our plan here is that we're going to go through a few slides to just give you some of the technical details of what is implemented in the tool, and then we'll show you the tool in action on a small application, Java application. So as I said earlier, right, our goal is to support automated validation of application modernization. So this could involve refactoring, migrating, replatforming, and so on. And then, of course, depending on the kind of activity you perform, the testing needs and validation needs would be different, right? But the overall idea is that we generate test cases automatically on the legacy version of the app. You can optionally add assertions to those test cases, and eventually you run them on the modernized app to detect behavioral differences. So the tool that we have built consists of 2 core components. There are 2 components. There is the core test generator, which performs what we call Ctd Guided Test Generation, and we're going to explain this a bit more. And then there is the CLI, which is how the users of the tool will primarily interact with. And both of these components use 2 open source tools. These are automatic unit test generators for Java that came out of academic research. So there's one tool called Rando that performs feedback-driven random approach for test generation. And then there's another called Evo Suite that implements search-based algorithms and constraint-based algorithms. Both of these tools are basically driven by code coverage. So they try to maximize coverage of statements and branches, right? And they use different techniques. So the new approach that we have implemented, which we call Ctd Guided Test Generation, basically it's a new way of computing coverage goals. And it's based on typed relationships. So basically what we're saying is that the tool will automatically analyze all the public methods of your application. It will construct a Ctd model where the parameters become where the parameters of the method are incorporated into the model. And then we analyze subtype relationships to basically see what are the possible types that you can invoke these methods with. So the overall goal is to basically exercise different methods with diverse but optimized sets of input vectors. So the test plans that are generated by the models are basically become your coverage goals, and we target test generations towards covering each row of the test plan. And the CLI lets the user use these 2 tools standalone if you'd like, or the Ctd guided approach. So all those options are available from the CLI. So Rachel, you want to go over this? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So here's an example of how we use Ctd Guided Generation. So we want to generate test cases that comprehensively cover this method draw shape. So we analyze the parameters to this method according to the class hierarchies, and also some more type analysis to understand what are the feasible concrete types for each parameter. And we see this on the right. So this is the first step that's done automatically. And in the second step, based on this analysis, we define a combinatorial testing model where for each parameter, we list the concrete types that it can be instantiated with. For example, circle, square, and triangle for the first one, and so on. And then once we have this Ctd model also automatically defined, then we generate a combinatorial test plan from this model. Each row here represents requirements for a single test method, how to instantiate the parameters with which concrete types of this method. And here we see a one-way test plan where each type appears at least once in any test case here in this test plan. And we can extend this. We can enhance the coverage requirements, for example, to a pairwise test plan, two-way, where now the test plan has the property that for each pair of parameters and for each pair of types of these parameters, we have at least one test case here that covers it. And the combinatorial optimizations allows us to create a powerful test plan with sufficient type combination coverage. If we wanted to cover everything, we needed 12 rows, and now we have only 6 or 1 or 3 rows, depending on our required interaction level. So this is how, in just a few words, how the combinatorial optimization works. And then we have the entire flow, which is the input to this tool is either a specific list of target classes according to what was changed in the migration process, or if none is given, then we target all application classes. So the first step is the modeling step that we saw in the previous slide, where we automatically generate the Ctd test plan. The second step is the initialization of test sequences in which we utilize Rundup and EvoSuite, and we provide them with the target methods and the target types that we identified. And then the final step is to extend these initial sequences to test methods that each test method covers a specific row in the test plan, and with a concrete test case. And we add also, optionally, we add the assertions to it by executing it in memory and recording the object states and adding them as assertions. The final output is JUnit test cases, either with or without assertions, and information about the Ctd coverage. And we'll see all these steps in the demo right now that we'll start. Okay, so for the demo, we are using a toy example called IRS, which has only 5 classes. And we have the legacy version and the refactored version that's split into partitions. And so here we see the steps of the demo. I suggest that we simply start with the demo.
Oops.
Okay, so the CLI is implemented in Python. So in order to start running the tool, we need configuration. Yes, so we have here the main commands, config, which relates to configuring the tool, generate for generating the test cases, and then execute for executing them. So we can look at the configuration options. Here we have we'll see a long list of options which we'll clean before the public release, but the most important ones are there are only like 5 required ones to provide the application name, class path file of external dependencies of the application, since we need to run it to execute it, the application class path itself, where it's located, the class files, and we need to also have a JDK installed, so we need to list where it is located, and more or less that's it. So let's move to generating the test cases on the IRS example. We're using the verbose option and we're using Ctd amplified, the Ctd guided approach, and we are we're using the verbose flag so we can see the progress of the generate command. So we're starting with running Ctd that created a total of 20 test cases, and now we can look for the initialization of sequences. We can look at the output of Rundup and EvoSuite as they're running, and this step takes about around 2 minutes. So we can see their progress on the different targeted classes.
Yeah, and both of these tools are running in separate threads in parallel,
right.
So basically using output from both Rundup and EvoSuite.
Yes,
And so this is the steps that generating the building block sequences that then we'll try to, after this step is done, then the test sequence extender will kick in, which will create test cases to
right. So we can see that there is a total of 20 test combinations created for 20 target methods. And once this the initialization of the basic block sequences will be done, then we'll have the extender run and complete the generation of a test method for each row in the Ctd test plan, invoking the method with the required types. Okay, and now we can see that what's the total coverage that was achieved is 18 out of 20 rows of the test plan we were able to generate test cases for, and a total of 68 diff assertions were created for all the sequences. And we see the location of where these test class files were written to, so we can open one of them to take a look at how the test cases look like. So here we see the employee test cases. So we have 3 test cases for 3 targeted methods, and each after each statement we have this assert equals that compares the state of the created object to the values that were recorded while running in memory on the legacy application. And each test method ends with a call to a target method, so like get employee ID and so on, and set name and so on. So this is how the test cases look like, of course, unit level test cases. And one more thing that is generated in this step is the Ctd Coverage Report. So even before we run the test cases, we already know what coverage we achieved in terms of Ctd, because this is something that's statically determined based on the method calls that we were able to perform in the generated test cases. So we see that we get in partition 1, we get a total of a 94.4 coverage of the Ctd rows, which is very high. And then we can drill down and see what are the places where we were at. So for example, get salary from IRS, we were not able to cover in the test generation.
Yeah, and the reason we're not able to cover it is that the test generator basically tries to pass in random values for the integer, and to get meaningful output from this method, you have to pass in a specific employee ID for which the data is. So this kind of highlights
this is, for example, something that carving would help us to do better.
Yeah.
Okay, so right back to you.
Yeah, so the next step, now that we have our test cases, so now we're going to execute them. So again, we can do that via the execute command, where we have 2 subcommands. So now I'm going to run it on the version of the application on which the test cases were generated. So all the test cases should pass in this case. So again, we're going to run them in the verbose mode. So what this tool is actually doing is it's generating an ant build file, which is actually generated along with the test cases, and then executing the test cases. In this case, these are small test cases. They run pretty fast. But we can look at the JUnit report that was generated. So here you can see that 17 test cases were run, and basically all of them passed. You can also look at the coverage reports, and we're using Jacoco in this case, which shows that what level of statement and branch coverage and cyclomatic complexity and those other things that these tests achieve. So in this case, it's a pretty good statement and branch coverage. I guess branch coverage is higher than statement coverage, but this is a very, very small app. Right? So that's where I executed the test. Now I'm going to execute it on the refactored version of the application. And like Rachel mentioned, the refactored version has actually split the application into different services. So previously, it would run as a centralized application with 5 classes. After distribution, there are two separate services, and that are running actually in containers on. So there is the IRS partition 2, and there is IRS partition 1. So now I'm going to run the test cases against these 2 versions. And actually, in this case, there is a bug in the refactoring process where, if the service when a service call happens from one partition to the other and the service returns an error value, then actually the calling partition does not handle that value correctly. So to run them on the refactored version, again, I run it from the CLI, and you'll see a similar process. In this case, the test cases will be run again, all the partitions. So it's running against partition 1 first, and then it runs against partition 2. And again, this test execution is pretty fast. And now we can look at the test reports again. So in this case, you see there were a number of test cases that failed. So basically, out of the 17 tests, 6 of the tests actually failed. And all of these errors are actually happening in the parsing of the JSON response that comes from one partition to the other, which is actually the bug in the refactoring. So basically, that's the idea with this tool, right? That you generate test cases automatically from the CLI. On the legacy version of the application, you can use the tools that are standalone, Randup or EvoSuite, or you can use Ctd Guided Test Generation, and then you can execute them on the modified application. So this currently works only for Java application, but the new work that we are starting now, which targets UI UX test cases, would be similar in nature, that you generate test cases on one version and execute them on the other, but they'll work from the web UI of the application. So they'll be applicable to a wider set of application in terms of the implementation technologies that are used. All right, so that's all we had for the demo. Are there any questions or comments?
I wanted to ask, those tests are basically unit tests, right, on the code level?
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
So,
these are JUnit test cases. Each one of them targets one method of the application, yes.
Yeah, so we are actually, what I understand, we are actually trying to understand whether the application, the microservices that was before migration is still behaving the same after migration, right? So
yes,
there are also tools like testing functionally on the API, on the Swagger, on the are we looking on those tools like actually testing end-to-end that the app is actually behaving, doing what is on the API level, not just on the code level?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we have thought about looking at this at the API level. And so there, actually, one thing you have to keep in mind is that your legacy application also has to be API-based, for example, REST APIs, right? So the scenario where we're looking at Java Enterprise Edition application, that's not the case. But you're right that this test generation can still be done at the service level. So on the legacy application, we can generate test cases at the servlet levels, for example. And then after you extract microservices and deploy them as REST APIs, then you, in theory, you should be able to run those test cases to check whether there are any differences. The problem is slightly harder because the test cases might need to be migrated, but that is something we are looking into as well.
And as Saurabh mentioned, we are also starting work on a end-to-end UI level test generation, which also will execute meaningful business scenarios end-to-end and not just at the unit level. So we are expanding beyond unit.
Yeah, there are also API-based and UI that it's like can automatically generate things without, like we in QE, when we are testing our application, we are actually testing predefined knowledge. But if it's just like dozens of apps, when I don't know the business behavior there, so there are a lot of automatic tools that we can explore. And so James,
leverage, yes.
Yeah. James, I wanted to ask, like these tools, they are kind of connected to which, to OCP 3 to 4, to which migration channel is it like connected?
Well, Daniel, this is basically when you're performing some sort of code changes in your application, the idea is to do some sort of generate automatically a functional snapshot of how the application behaves in order to have some sort of safety net to know that the application behaves the same. So many different scenarios there. For example, something along the lines of Spring Boot to Quarkus, changing the application server, or doing some sort of refactoring of any other nature, just being able to certify that the behavior remains the same. I think that's the main value for this tool. So not so much about rehosting and replatforming, it's more about refactoring and doing migrations that involve code changes.
Yeah, I think both. Maybe also
yeah, sure.
platforming. Yeah, those can be used in different scenarios.
Yeah, sure. Depending if you are doing the replatforming, just changing the underneath platform, but not changing the source code, there shouldn't be a need for this. But sometimes in some projects you have some sort of coupling with the API from the previous runtime platform and things like that. So you definitely need to test, do some code changes and test the application afterwards.
Yeah, and in those scenarios, you may not want to do low-level unit-level testing like this tool does. So their API-level testing, I think, would probably make more sense.
That's it.
At the REST
API. Absolutely. Okay, so any other questions related to the testing tool or any of the tools we've seen during the session? Remember, you guys, that we have the Miro board to share some stuff there. You can put sticky notes straight into each slide with comments, thoughts, questions, anything that comes to mind. So if you have nothing, I think we can move on to the feedback from the field session. Anything else on this? Okay. So yeah, the last part of the planning session today was going to be focused about having some actual feedback from people from the field, not only about the tools themselves, but also about the functional space, the features that we're trying to cover with the tool, and see if the kind of work we're doing here is aligned with what you guys see out there in the field and working with customers. So we have a series of topics that we would like to ask you about and get your feedback, your opinion, and see how aligned we all are to provide the best set of tools for you guys in the field to make things easier for you to do these large scale migration projects. So first question that we have here, first topic that we want to touch upon is do the features presented during our presentation, during the series of tools that we are showing us here, do these features cover your common use cases in these migration projects you work in? Are you missing something? I should take that as a no? Or
I
is
think
everyone...
Or don't forget to come off mute.
Drew, you were saying?
Yeah, no, I think taken as a whole, I think they cover a lot of various scenarios that we encounter in the field at various organizations. So they have one or more of the common problems. So a lack of unit tests is generally a reason why the modernization effort is considered too heavy of a lift, because they don't have enough manual testers or time in their manual testers to go back and retest the new app. So that's always a struggle to get through that. So if we could say, well, let's buoy up your unit test coverage first. Now you have automated unit testing. We've removed that barrier. Let's move forward with the modernization efforts. And then these tests, live forever, and you can then augment them over time. That's one scenario we encounter a lot. So I like that. I was trying to figure out, this is my first, the ACA, the AI-driven thing. It wasn't clear to me exactly how that will integrate in, whether we'll use the tags, whether over time the AI would be able to possibly determine the level of effort for an app to go from whatever the tag set is, even without doing a full-blown assessment or introspection, to say whether it should be, be able to take one or more paths that are sort of destination paths for a given app in the inventory. I was trying to get my head around that, and it wasn't immediately clear to me how that would integrate, but it looks very interesting.
So Drew, about that, a usual scenario in customers, I'm a product manager, but I come from consulting myself, so I've done plenty of these large-scale migration projects. So a common scenario is that you go to the customer and you are given some sort of Excel file, a spreadsheet with a list of applications, and maybe you have some column about the technologies. Let's say JBoss, Spring, and I don't know, Hibernate or something like that. The ACA is able to understand those human readable tags that the customer may add to try to explain the technology stack for a given application, and from there create a recommendation on what will be the target container based on that information. What will be the target image for that application to run on containers?
Okay, so as an organization, you give it what the available targets are at the org, or is it just known targets across the wild world?
So, come again, Drew? Sorry, I didn't get that.
Are you able to tell, I guess, for that tool, are you able to say, as an organization, these are the identified possible targets we have available as of today, run the AI against it, it'll either match or not match, and then over time in the iterative nature, as you make manual decisions about apps over time, does it also learn, okay, well, this app looks a lot like that app, and this is the decision we made. So all of the apps that look like this can now probably take that path. And then
you got me there. I'm not so sure about that. Anoop?
Jin here, maybe. Yeah,
Jin,
sorry,
okay.
Anoop couldn't join right now. So let me see if I can cover. Yeah, so that actually belongs to a particular branch of AI called reinforcement learning. So yes, that's something we will be looking at. So the current immediate priority for us, as far as ACA is concerned, is to make sure we have enough knowledge graph capture such that when we see an application portfolio, we have sufficient understanding about the technology involved and their interdependencies to provide that initial recommendation. As a follow-on to that, now we want to look at essentially what we call personalization, right? Which go back to what the question and comment is can we now look at and understand the particular preferences and particular outcomes that come out of the field for a particular enterprise portfolio that may be different, that may be specialized, and what do we learn from that? So yeah, for sure, it's on the roadmap. It's just not the immediate, not this year, basically. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'd love to see like a full demo of it this year to see how it starts to shape up in these sort of large sets of inventory scenarios. And we all know like a low enough number of apps, all of this tooling is overkill because we can brute force it eventually anyway, given a timeline. But if we're talking 1,000 plus, many thousands of apps, then we're trying to say, okay, automation is our friend, intelligence is our friend. How do we identify these sort of repeatable patterns? And then on the tail end of sort of the MTA tool or windup, once we've identified paths, can we also then trigger an automation that sort of builds the target configure, whatever, maybe a lot of times, there's sort of build a target repo and migrate the code over, make whatever automatic changes we can. And then you're basically starting from a git clone fix sort of standpoint to just true up that app and then see if it runs in the target. So that would shorten the time to migrate per app significantly. Yeah. And, at scale, that's our biggest enemy is the time per app.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, another aspect of ACA, which we only touched light on, which is actually very much appreciated by the clients and people we worked with, is the ability to auto-curate. So as Ramon alluded to, early onboarding stage, when you're just engaging with a user or client that have a sizable application portfolio, say 100 plus, they tend to be represented in very loosely unstructured ways, right? You're not pulling things out of CMDB. You're not having discovery tools run on the environment. What you will get is spreadsheet, if you're lucky, or some form of textual documentation that's generated on the field, which can be wildly inconsistent. So what happens today is we literally have to throw very smart people at it. In general, for 100 app portfolio, it takes anywhere from 3 weeks to over a month to go through, as you can imagine. Now, what AC allows to do is it helps to fast pace through that initial curation. It's going to load all that data using AI to figure out, do I understand what you're talking about? So you deal with aliases, you deal with different sort of textual passing, you understand relations, you even do auto-filling for you. For example, if you're looking at .NET, even if you didn't say OS is Windows, you basically can deduce, okay, you gotta be able to have a Windows deployment. So that's all of that. And then basically say, hey, out of this 100, there's 12 of them that's either missing or have suspicious information you gotta look at, right? So immediately your scope of focus gets reduced. So that's also a very important aspect that we believe ACA can help.
Yeah, I was going to say it does a rough ballpark based on sketchy data. And it's a useful tool for that.
Okay, anyone else wants to share some thoughts, concerns, opinions, questions about these use cases that we have presented? Anything missing, maybe? Okay, so then we can move on to the next topic / question that we have for you. And it's related about the delivery method for this tool set. So what kind of installation methods suits your usual scenario better? Having a tightly integrated suite delivered by an operator on a Kubernetes cluster, a set of standalone tools that can be installed separately anywhere, maybe CLI-based tool. What works best for you? A cup of coffee, maybe?
This is one of those tricky ones because the scenarios that I run into a lot of times are we want to show that we have these tools, potentially that they work to tackle existing state, right? And then, but we're trying to get them on sort of a 2B state, which is going to be a lot of times Kubernetes. So having the tool be able to run in a maybe not already in existence Kubernetes posture is easy, but it's not always easy in every environment where you're trying to, be able, so being able to spin them up standalone is good, but long term, when you're doing these multiple iteration modernization efforts, I think having at least the artifacts or whatever the sort of set of data that is generated be sort of exportable and importable, so that if you do sort of over time, I've done step 1 or 2, we now have our first round of apps we're going to migrate or modernize. Now we have a target platform or platforms, one of them being Kubernetes. Then I can install my tool set on Kubernetes where it can run happily and be repeatedly used, import everything so I don't have to repeat myself and start where we left off. And then if it was first run by, a sales type persona initially in their test cluster somewhere that probably wasn't owned by the organization, you still have the artifacts and they can live as the sort of engagement or modernization effort happens over many months or potentially many years in some of these cases.
Okay, and is that an unusual scenario? Do you find problems in your customers when it comes to having this kind of Kubernetes resources being shared with the migration team? Drew, I was thinking about you.
What do you mean by issues with like sharing the Kubernetes cluster with the migration tool?
Yeah, I mean about the resources. In my case, I found some customers out there not wanting to invest, resources coming out of their clusters into this thing. But this could be special customers. I want to know if you guys find something like that out there, or just the kind of customers I've been engaged with. Just curious.
No, I can totally see that happening. I personally haven't had a whole lot of pushback on that. I think it's like if you don't want to run it where it runs best, what are the alternatives? It's usually what is their legacy way of doing it, and how long does it take to get legacy stuff provisioned? And I don't know. I'd push back as hard as I can until I hit a wall that was immovable to run it in the best posture on Kubernetes, and just say, from a services consulting standpoint, I'd be willing to say, like, in the cost model that you're looking at, maybe there's room for, these tools are kind of our free tools, right? They're helper tools to get to an end state that is where, the support subscription or whatever cost is actually, the revenue stream at the end of it. But so we would need to be probably able to give people a break if that's the argument. It's just don't be a tenant on my cluster to migrate everything to my cluster. That's kind of like, I don't know, self-defeating to say, if the tools run best in the cluster, I want to run them in the hardest way so that the least amount of stuff can be migrated to my cluster that I'm preserving its resources on. Seems like just a tough argument to win over time, but I could see that sort of purist standpoint. This cluster is reserved only for real tenants, and you're sort of a in-between tenant. So I guess the only question is, do you want to give me a whole other cluster for that, or?
Yeah. Just curious about what you guys see out there. I mean, I've seen customers being very protective about their own resources and not wanting to share them with consultants on the field. On the other hand, I've seen customers just giving you, all the liberties to provision whatever you want. So I think it depends on the kind of relationship you have with your customers, and how protective the customer might be about their own information and infrastructure. So just curious to know about this.
I think the biggest concern that I see come up all the time is if we have any tooling where we give them anything that looks like elevated privileges to the cluster, right? So that's usually their tenant model. If they really want to be like, if you can play safely and nicely in one namespace or a set of namespaces, and they're not at all privileged really, then you're usually a safe tenant. If it needs cluster admin or anything like that, that's usually where the flags go up, and you have to start, trying to figure out what's the safe way to run it, or can we justify the exception that it needs cluster admin because it's doing cluster admin things that otherwise I will just ask you to do 400 times a day over the next 6 months.
Absolutely.
Pick which one you want to do.
Absolutely. Anyone else on this resources thing, the distribution model? Any consultants, architects out there doing migration stuff that want to share some thoughts about this? So it seems like we will have to invite Drew to a beer or something like that afterwards, because he's saving the discussion. Come on, don't be shy.
And Drew, I'm in agreement with you that the availability of the tools is also a chicken and the egg kind of thing. That we want you to reach an end state that includes our runtimes and our infrastructure. And if you don't have the infrastructure yet, requiring it as an operator deployment is going to make that even more difficult.
Yeah, and I was having a discussion with an SA, well, a TSM that had a pot of SAs, and they were trying to figure out, like, how do I do the quickest amount of assessment to identify a target app that could be migrated or modernized within, either a POC context or like an actual like small paid pilot context. And they, it was like, well, Pathfinder's, the thing we have. And they're like, well, that's like too many questions, right? So we're trying to get the least amount of questions.
Yeah, I agree with Drew. I think we need all of the tools. So we need to be able to do it standalone just to showcase like how our assessment works. And then, ideally, if a customer, does bite off on services to help us do a much larger assessment, having that kind of standard install model on top of OpenShift is really important. Maybe we could package it with, so this easily runs with community OpenShift as well. So if they don't want to buy subscriptions for it and they just want to run this tool, next to their production cluster, then maybe they could do that. I think it'd also be interesting to see like what a SaaS model looks like. So something in the cloud where they could say, okay, here is my WAR file, or here's my GitHub repo. Give me a quick assessment, or let me take a Pathfinder assessment and show me what a kind of sample migration plan looks like.
Yeah, Marshall. In the case of Tackle, obviously no OpenShift will be required. This is designed to be executed on vanilla Kubernetes, so any Kubernetes distribution will work there. So no actual requirements of having OpenShift subscriptions or anything like that. Whatever Kubernetes flavor that you have will be enough to run the tool. Even while testing some of our services, we were using Minikube ourselves. So that might work if you want to have some sort of standalone local approach. You could use Minikube and deploy the tool set.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing. I think it boils down to, do you need to share the data, or are you working alone? Right. And if you're working alone, right, run it on your workstation and only you have it. But if you need to share it with multiple, people doing migrations, you got to put something somewhere on a server so they can share the data. So I think that you got to have both. I think
absolutely. On the testing side too, I love this aspect of it because it is really one of the hardest aspects for these legacy applications where there's no real supporting team, there's no QA team, right? But I would love to see it expanded to an integration test as well. So like being able to run like a set of tests against existing services and get back the response, and then be able to use that as a test harness for your migrated application. I think that would be a really, really powerful tool for us as well. So then we could say, okay, your legacy service is returning these results with this input, your migrated service is returning these results with this input, and have it be using their actual web services there. I think would be a compelling way to.
Yeah, that case, it absolutely rocks. But also what we have right now, the unit testing approach, I think is very useful. For example, one usual approach for at least in Red Hat Consulting is to do these things called migration factories. And you have migrators that are, doing the actual transformations required in the application for it to run on the target platform. But the migrator doesn't have, functional knowledge about the application. So having a way to automatically certify to a certain degree that the application behaves the same. Before, what we were doing is just performing the changes, just deploying the application on the target platform, and if it started, that's it. We can throw it back to the Q&A team to actually certify that the application behaves the same, because we don't have the functional knowledge to test the application aside from maybe logging in and doing a couple of things. So
yeah, I definitely get that. It would be a later stage of the migration.
That's it. So this reduces this tennis match that we usually have with the QA teams when we are migrating an application. So we do something, the application deploys, but they find something after the second formulary form or something like that, and the application goes back to the migration team. This somehow reduces this tennis match between the migration team and the QA team.
One question, maybe a bit from the left field here, is we are seeing a lot of interest
in .NET and Windows workloads, an opportunity for moving them onto OpenShift, particularly with the support for Windows containers. Is that something you're looking at in Tackle as a roadmap item to? Yeah.
Not yet, but it's there in the backlog. I wouldn't say it's not a priority right now. We're trying to build something around the Java EE ecosystem, but it's something that we definitely have in mind.
Okay. So there's some action on the move to Cube side, Ramon. If you're able to attend tomorrow, the team's going to cover that. Maybe that gives a bit of a starting point. We'd just love to understand if there's dots to connect that give a quick win, right?
Absolutely. I'll try to be there. I will be there.
Thank you.
Okay, so one last question, one last topic for the audience, and it's related to the personas involved in a migration. Do you see all the usual personas involved in a migration project being considered in the tooling and the features that we are providing, or are we missing anyone? Because as you can see, we're very focused on the in the beginning, MTA and windup was very focused on the architect, on the high level. Now we're focusing on both the architect and the developer performing the changes with the different tools that we are adding. But maybe there are some other personas involved in the whole migration process that we are missing here.
Right. The one persona that I don't think we've tackled yet with tooling is the sort of called the SRE or the target platform operator persona in the scenario of the sort of app team or namespace level onboarding. So
okay,
there's already some existing operators and stuff out there that if we generate the input files to those that are standardized across an organization, then we could be feeding sort of existing automation if someone wants to use like the namespace config operator or something like that, or if there's other automations like existing Jenkins pipelines that could be called via API that could be triggered by the end state of the sort of inventory. You've made your decision, now execute, right? I've picked my path, now run my path. If it's automated, call the things that I've plugged in, and now sort of the app team onboarding sense can be automated, and you're basically automating that part. You get your namespace, you get your access, you get everything you need there, at least whatever boilerplate can exist, and then the team or teams can be up and running, and then starting to tackle whatever the sharp edges were for that particular use case or migrated app, that need to then start to be addressed to get to test coverage, test completion, test generation, or just validation that it works, and then any findings there could either go back into things that are now new things to look out for within that org, or just a set of things that will remain manual fixes because not everything will be automated. But
So Drew, when you talk about setting up CI/CD, do you feel, since these are customers newly coming to Kubernetes, that it would be helpful to be prescriptive and say, we've got things that work with Argo CD, and and you could use anything you want, but here's a solution that works for you? Yeah,
I think, for the interest of speed versus value to the org, I think being prescriptive in the absence of them having a high competency in the CI/CD space, being prescriptive is better than hemming and hawing over what's what does CI/CD mean to us as an organization. We've got plenty of good enough CI/CD out there that we could automate, and then they could feel free to augment over time as they became more competent with it. But when we're talking to customers that are hundreds or thousands of apps of legacy stuff, and they're trying to figure out CI/CD. I'd say be prescriptive first, and then, you know, as they get their own people that can form their own opinions, they can change their mind, and then, you know, figure out a way to push out those changes to all the pipelines. But, you know, we're looking for fast value add tools that, you know, help get us to critical mass of migrated apps, so then we can learn from all that experience in the org to see a really clear roadmap of how much more is it going to take to do the rest of our apps, or how much more of our apps is there still value to migrate. And that changes over time as each org sort of takes the journey, like, oh, we're going to migrate all the apps is usually the first one. And then, you know, reality is only 50% of them provide any monetary or competitive value to us as an organization. Let's stop here, or else we're just chasing an output, not an outcome. So that's where, you know, trying to give them immediate value. And then if they've got their own that we can just tie into, great. That's what I'm thinking, like the tail end of your decision is, oh, it's going to the Kubernetes platform. Run this automation. If it exists, just call this endpoint, do it. If it doesn't exist, okay, here's a canned thing that you can call that's prescriptive in the absence of your own working one. You know, and when you do these replatforming efforts, I've always kind of thought, like, this is your one chance as an organization. If you really wanted to throw something away, here's an opportunity to do it and not anger too many people about, you know, throwing the baby out or whatever. You know, you got a chance to start fresh. Use it for as much of fixing of things you can.
Yeah, no, good, thanks. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I would also say having some sort of prescriptive or opinionated way of deploying the applications, having some way of generating manifests depending on the source technology and the target technology inside of Kubernetes. That's something that is going around our heads, but we still have to figure that thing out. But definitely, that's a great idea, Drew. So we're reaching the top of the hour. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you very much. Don't forget to reach us in the Conveyor channel from the Kubernetes Slack. Get in touch with us, and for all the upcoming news, just follow the Conveyor Twitter account. And thanks for coming, and thanks for sharing this much stuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your feedback, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.